You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Struggling to secure on-prem apps with modern identity? Don't worry, you're not alone. Join industry leaders from Fortune 500 organizations to secure your apps on any cloud with any IDP, regardless of your environment's complexity. Meet Strata's identity orchestration platform, Mavericks. Say goodbye to the headaches of app refactoring and legacy tech debt. With identity orchestration, you can modernize legacy apps to use MFA or passwordless authentication in a few weeks, migrate from one IDP to another, and so much more without changing the app. No matter your IAM use case, Strata extends the value of your current identity investments. And the best part? You can try it for free today. Visit strata.io/cyberwire to share your biggest identity challenge, and they'll hook you up with a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. Don't miss out. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. That's strata.io/cyberwire. Eastern European gangs overcome their reservations about working with anglophone criminals. Mirth Connect is vulnerable to a critical flaw. A look at a mercenary spyware strain. PepsiCo as phishbait. Ben Yelin explains the FCC's renewed interest in net neutrality. Our guest is Wade Baker from the Cyentia Institute with insights on measuring risk. And Europol thinks police should take a good look at quantum computing and law enforcement. I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Friday, October 27th, 2023. Microsoft describes Octo Tempest, a financially motivated threat actor that uses social engineering to compromise organizations around the world. Microsoft researchers write, in mid-2023, Octo Tempest became an affiliate of AlphaV Black Cat, a human-operated ransomware-as-a-service operation, and initial victims were extorted for data theft with no ransomware deployment using AlphaV Collections leak site. This is notable in that historically, Eastern European ransomware groups refused to do business with native English-speaking criminals. By June 2023, Octo Tempest started deploying AlphaV Black Cat ransomware payloads, both Windows and Linux versions, to victims, and lately has focused their deployments primarily on VMware ESXi servers. Octo Tempest progressively broadened the scope of industries targeted for extortion, including natural resources, gaming, hospitality, consumer products, retail, managed service providers, manufacturing, law, technology, and financial services. Among the gang's victims, the record points out, was MGM Resorts. At the time of that attack, the group was being called Scattered Spider, Octopus, or UNC 3944. One of the more repellent features of Octo Tempest's activity is its willingness to make direct personal threats of violence to bully victims into giving up their credentials. A sample threat reads as follows: if we don't get your login in the next 20 minutes, we're sending a shooter to your house. Your wife is going to get shot if you don't fold it. Let me know. We'll send shooters to both. LOL. It's even worse in print than it is read aloud, and there's a lot more than this. It's not just the leet speak, the LOLs, when referring to shootings. These aren't just misled kids. The Octo Tempest crooks are suffering from a bad case of internet disinhibition. SecurityWeek reports that Mirth Connect, an open-source data integration platform developed by NextGen Healthcare, is vulnerable to a flaw that could allow attackers to bypass protections for a critical severity remote code execution flaw that was patched in August. Researchers at Horizon3.ai discovered the new flaw, noting that it was fixed in version 4.4.1 of Mirth Connect. The researchers state, We urge all users of Mirth Connect, especially instances that are internet-facing, to prioritize updating. Researchers at Hyas Labs have published an analysis of the Predator spyware developed by Cytrox. The researchers note that Sequoia earlier this month found evidence suggesting that the spyware may have been used by the Madagascar government. One of the recurrent concerns about spyware products, or lawful intercept tools, as they're also called, is the perennial temptation to abuse by governments they represent. Inky is tracking a phishing campaign that's impersonating PepsiCo to deliver malware. Inky says, as usual, it all starts with a phishing email. In this case, the phishers are impersonating the PepsiCo brand, pretending to be potential clients. They're claiming to need what the recipient sells, and they're asking them to submit a quote for PepsiCo to review. What the would-be victim doesn't know is that attached to the email is a malicious disk image disguised as an RFQ, that is, a request for quote. The U.S. State Department is attempting to pre-bunk Russian disinformation campaigns, the New York Times reports, operating from the premise that disinformation is easier to discredit and refute before it begins to spread through amplification in legitimate and semi-legitimate channels. The effort works by identifying disinformation operations in their earliest phases and by exposing the fronts and agents of influence before they can begin repeating their themes. Pre-bunking is part refutation, that is, addressing the false claims on their merits, and part transparency, identifying the fronts and trolls as such before they gain traction. ESET's APT activity report for the second and third quarter of 2023 matches unpatched vulnerabilities with government-sponsored offensive cyber operations. Unsurprisingly, Russian cyber activity retains its focus on Ukraine. The main Russian APT group's ESET tracks are Sandworm, Turla, Sednit, and Gameradon. ESET says that the greatest of these from the Ukrainian perspective is Gameradon, which significantly enhanced its data collecting capabilities by redeveloping existing tools and deploying new ones. The others aren't to be dismissed either. The French security agency ANSSI warned yesterday that Fancy Bear, APT-28, or Sednit, whichever name you prefer, has succeeded in penetrating sensitive networks in France. The targeting is commonplace for an espionage campaign. Fancy Bear has been interested in government agencies, businesses, universities, research institutes, and think tanks. Cyber Daily reports that no-name 05716, specialists in nuisance-level DDoS attacks, has put Australia on notice, No Name says, for its Russophobic contributions to Ukraine's war effort. The hacktivist auxiliary said it had hit sites belonging to Adelaide Bank's NetBank portal, the Transperth Transport Agency, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal's online portal, and the Northern Territory Department of Infrastructure, Planning and Logistics. The hacktivist's communique deplored Australia's decision to send a military aid package worth $12 million to Ukraine. The only effect the shipment will have, No Name said, will be to give the Russians more material to capture. And besides, it amounts to theft from the Australian taxpayers. No Name says, we are going to Australia for destroying portals of critical infrastructure. It's an overstatement. Only the Transperth website sustained periodic and annoying disruption. The other three targets rode out the attack without much difficulty. And finally, Europol is urging its colleagues in law enforcement to think hard about the implications of quantum computing. Europol's Innovation Lab has published a report titled The Second Quantum Revolution, in which it outlines the potential implications of the new technology for law enforcement. Greater computational power promises new cryptographic challenges and new sensing opportunities. The report represents preparatory work. It urges agencies to stay aware of developments in the new field, and it summarizes its recommendations under 5 headings: observe quantum trends, build up knowledge and start experimenting, foster research and development projects, assess the impact of quantum technologies on fundamental rights, and review your organization's transition plans. That is, of course, transition to the post-quantum future. And trust us, it's not going to look like the quantum realm from Ant-Man. Coming up after the break, Ben Yelin explains the FCC's renewed interest in net neutrality. Our guest is Wade Baker from the Cyentia Institute with insights on measuring risk. Stick around. Hey everybody, Dave here. Are your sales and marketing teams tasked with ever-growing brand awareness and lead gen goals? The CyberWire is a great way to put your message into the ear of decision makers across cyber and help fill your funnel. We have great sponsorship opportunities available, but we're filling up fast. Contact our team now to learn more about how sponsorship of the CyberWire can help build your business at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. This episode of the CyberWire is supported by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics big, small, and strange. Compiler comes to you from the makers of Command Line Heroes and is hosted by Angela Andrews and Brent Simoneau. You know, one of the things I love about Compiler is the way they address issues that we're all thinking about. In a recent episode called The Great Stack Debate, they debate whether a software stack is like an onion, a sheet cake, or lasagna. That's the kind of metaphor I can get behind. If you're like me, you don't have a lot of time, and so you want to have a show that is concise and respects your time, and Compiler does just that. I hope you will check it out. Listen to Compiler in your favorite podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to Compiler for their support. Wade Baker is co-founder of the Cyentia Institute and also a professor in the College of Business at Virginia Tech. Cyentia Institute recently published the latest edition of their Information Risk Insight Study, or IRIS reports, focusing on threat event analysis. I checked in with Wade Baker for the details.
And I've done a lot of studies in the information security space going back years and have always wanted to demonstrate how to quantify cyber losses. And I just haven't had the data to do it in the past. So I'm probably best known for starting and working on Verizon's data breach investigations report for a long time. And we had phenomenal information about how incidents occur and who's behind them, and how assets are impacted and how organizations respond. But we never had, what are the losses? You know, how do those events impact organizations long after the forensic investigation is gone? So the IRIS series Information Risk Insight Study is all about, what is the probability of an event and how much do those events cost, and showing that you actually can come up with historically proven numbers on those kinds of things, and you don't have to make it all guesswork.
Well, let's dig into some of the findings from this year's version. What are some of the things that stood out to you?
So there are quite a few things, and some of them are, I hate to say obvious because that sounds negative, but we get the opportunity to add data to some things that maybe we believe, and then in other cases data overturns maybe what we believe. But just an example, we do a lot about how industry and size of organizations impact the probability of different types of loss events and how much those events are. So, what's probably not surprising is if you are a really large organization, you are much, 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 much more likely to have a security incident than a really small organization, right? You have a bigger attack surface, you have brand recognition and maybe targeted attacks, all of those kinds of things. So, that's one of those that's maybe not so incredibly obvious, is pretty obvious. And then, I think we have some other things that maybe less so. What is the cost of a typical security incident? I think you ask anybody, lots of different opinions on that. we found that the median loss is about $260,000. And I get lots of different reactions when I say that. Some think that's ridiculously low. How can that possibly be? Others think that's high. But we're talking about all types of security incidents here. The 95th percentile loss is much larger. That's 52 million. And I kind of think maybe that's part of the misconception is people think about the really big stuff that we hear about the headlines and forget about the sort of daily things that stack up, but don't cost a huge amount.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I find for myself personally is taking those numbers and making them meaningful. There are all these numbers thrown around, but how do I align that with my own organization and how I should go about evaluating my own risk?
100%. I think that's a huge challenge because we hear of all of these reports of incidents occurring, and some terrible thing happens to another organization, and the obvious question is, hey, could that happen to us? And if so, what would that be like? And we try to tackle a few of those things in the report. One of the things that we do is, we can measure losses objectively and say, hey, this was a $100 million loss. And what is the probability that any given organization experiences a $100 million loss? Okay, you can answer that. But we can also make that a little bit more relevant by looking at it as a proportion of revenue, and asking the question, what is the likelihood that a small organization will have a loss that equals 1%, 10%, 100% of their revenue versus a large organization. And that is something that I think was a really important point in the latest IRIS, is that smaller organizations are very disproportionately impacted by security events. In other words, it might be smaller amounts from a just straight dollars perspective, but as a proportion of their revenue, even menial events can be, a quarter or much higher of their revenue. And that hurts a lot when you're a small company and margins are slim.
As you gather your data here, are there any myths that you want to dispel here? I think about sometimes, I think folks call them zombie facts. They're dead, but they keep on living, and we can't seem to shed them. Is any things like that in your findings?
There is one in particular that comes to mind as a myth, and I'm not going to name names here, but there is a study that is very often cited that gives a straight dollar per record as a means of quantifying losses around an event. So if you have, it's $150 per record or $180 per record, and then you take the number of records that were compromised in an event, you multiply it by $150, and voila, that's how much the event cost. And we do some picking apart of that because it is just dead wrong. There is no such thing as a linear dollar per record loss. The data time and time again shows this. And there are much, much better, more accurate ways of estimating losses given something like the amount of data that was compromised, rather than just multiplying by, a single amount. And that's a myth that we have tried, some say a little bit too hard in these reports to dispel, but it still sticks around.
What do you hope people take away from this report in terms of actionable items?
I am hoping that, one, people will say that, hey, we can quantify risk and therefore better manage it. There's been a long time argument over whether that's possible. And I think if you read the IRIS and look at what we've done, we've proven that you can actually do that. And then second, I hope that people look at some of this analysis and say, hey, I think we could benefit from this. I would like to have this to aid my decisions on, are we over at risk? What should we do about it? Which threats are more relevant to my organization, and those kinds of things? Because I really do think the time is far past in the management of cybersecurity that we take a more measured and risk-oriented approach. We always preach that, but very few people get beyond sort of the high, medium, low type buckets applied to risk and realize that we can do this and the outcomes are going to be better.
That's Wade Baker from the Cyentia Institute. The report is IRIS, Threat Event Analysis. And joining me once again is Ben Yelin. He's from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security and also my co-host over on the Caveat podcast. Ben, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Dave.
Interesting story you and I talked about on this week's Caveat about how the FCC, thanks to having an additional member on their board, is able to make a move here with net neutrality. Well, what's going on here, Ben?
So we finally have a Democratic majority on the FCC. The newest nominee from President Biden was just confirmed recently by the Senate. Back in 2015, the Obama administration initiated a rulemaking process that led to net neutrality. Basically, the idea here is reclassifying broadband as a telecommunications service. That allows the FCC to regulate internet service providers and make sure that they are not throttling companies who want to use greater bandwidth. So things like Netflix and other streaming services. That's the point of maintaining that neutrality. So this doesn't become kind of a fee-for-service jungle where the main providers, the Verizons, the AT&Ts of the world, are auctioning off this broadband space to the highest bidder. The Trump administration came in 2017 under the leadership of Ajit Pai. They got their own majority on the FCC, and they reversed Obama-era net neutrality rules. Basically, their rationalization then is that this was a 1930s-style regulation on the open internet, that we should be fostering an open marketplace to the extent possible, and that this won't lead to the sort of parade of horribles that you would hear about in warnings in 2017, that we're going to lose our open internet, that net neutrality is going to cut against all the principles that make the internet great. In defense of Ajit Pai and his majority, I mean, we really haven't seen those types of impacts over the past several years. As far as we can tell, the internet is in pretty good shape. Streaming services work well without the need for this kind of heavy-handed federal government regulation. But the Biden administration is interested in reviving these Obama-era rules. So they're going through the rulemaking process right now. They are on the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. I'm sure industry is going to weigh in. The final rule will probably be published sometime in January or February, and then I think we can expect a lot of lawsuits that are challenging the statutory authority for the FCC to take this action, and then possibly some constitutional issues as well. So certainly this is just the beginning of the story, and we'll have to see what happens with both the rulemaking process and the almost certain court cases that we're going to see.
Yeah. You know, I think it's fair to say one thing that industry hates is uncertainty. And with this swinging back and forth, you've got, Obama puts this in play, Trump takes it out of play, Biden puts it back into play. It's easy to see perhaps if we get a Republican president, it goes back out of play. And how long can that go on?
Yeah, I mean, there are other areas of policy that go like this, where you just ping pong based on presidential administrations. The long running one is something called the Mexico City policy, which is about prohibiting any sort of foreign aid going to governments around the world that promote reproductive health and abortion services. January 20th, every time there's a new administration, when it's the Democrats, they reverse the Mexico City policy. When it's the Republicans, they reinstate it.
Interesting.
And I'm wondering if net neutrality is going to be one of those principles where the Democrats, the Democratic members of the FCC are so committed to this principle. They think that the regulation that was instituted in 2015 under Obama was necessary not just to maintain a free internet, but also giving the FCC more authority to protect national security on our broadband networks, implementing cybersecurity standards. And then the Republican members see this as heavy-handed federal regulation that actually plays no role in maintaining a free and open internet. So yeah, I think we could see this kind of ping pong back and forth through presidential administrations. And I know that's frustrating for the industry because, as you said, they rely on certainty.
Yeah. This article points out that for sure we're probably going to see lawsuits from industry once the rulemaking is done, that those lawsuits are inevitable.
I think they're absolutely inevitable. The legal challenges will come on day one when this is published in the Federal Register. I think the companies have obviously a large stake in net neutrality rules. I think there's certainly profit potential in a less regulated industry for companies like Verizon, AT&T, et cetera. But yeah, I think there's no doubt that we're going to see litigation.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on it here. Interesting move. Ben Yelin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. Find out more about sponsoring our programs at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Be sure to check out this weekend's Research Saturday and my conversation with Danny Adamidas from Lumen's Black Lotus Labs. We're discussing No Rest for the Wicked. Hiatus Rat takes little time off in a return to action. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by our editorial staff. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week.